Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, the Guide to Italian Travel. I'm Darcy Melton.
And I'm Nathaniel Malor. Thank you everyone who is joining us for the first time, and thank you to everyone who is coming back for another listen. We hope you are enjoying this episode as much as you enjoyed the first episode that you listened to. And if you'd like to follow us, we have an Instagram at Only a Bag Podcast on Instagram. We also have onlyabagpodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to send us an email or a message, comment, concern, compliment, anything and any of the above. And we have a website, onlyabag.com. If you'd like reading articles or having anything that you'd like to save or bookmark, you can do so on our website.
Which is being revamped not as we speak, actually, but generally.
But before and after, as we speak, it is being revamped in terms of timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And if you'd like to also leave in reviews, you can do so Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, depending where you listen. I'm not entirely sure where else you can leave a review that isn't either out of business or been gobbled up by another podcast provider. So if you listen to Apple and if you listen to Spotify, we genuinely appreciate it. We've been actually noticing that the review count has been going up. And we genuinely appreciate it. It is so lovely to check in.
It's incredibly helpful.
It really is. Oh, it's phenomenally helpful. Which actually brings us to something very briefly we're going to mention and then get into the episode today, which is how to live in Italy. But we might be changing our tagline to something around the lines of Italy travel, like your guide to Italy travel or how to Italy travel. That sounds awful, but only because when you do Google, search us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, most people, I think, would search Italy travel because it's just the two most common words in terms of you want to travel and you want to travel in Italy. And our podcast does not pop up. But when you type in Italian travel, it's like number 2. So it's a little bit difficult to find us, we realize, for new listeners. So we're going to try to figure out if we can just corral Italy travel into the tagline of the podcast. That way we pop up for more people. So in case you're listening and you're thinking, that sounds a real clunky, we're doing it to please our SEO AI gods.
Yeah, it's a real pickle.
It's a real pickle. So,
and also a warning to everybody, if I sound weird, I don't have a cold, but I do have the sneezes. I'm going to try to not sneeze or sniffle too much. I breathed in some of my oil paint yesterday, and it really set off my allergies, so I sound a little weird.
This is just like the pitfalls of becoming an oil painter, I guess.
Don't sniff your paint, y'all. I didn't do it on purpose. I was checking something and I happened to breathe in a lot of old paint.
I like that. Don't also huff paint. That's a pretty good rule.
Yep.
Rule of thumb. That's what you learn here at Only a Bag. And today we're going to talk about how to live in Italy. So this is going to be essentially part 1 of a number of parts. We're not really sure how long this will go, but it is, I would say, the other half of Only a Bag. Only a Bag was originally designed to teach people through podcasts and the website how to travel in Italy in terms of just how to really be a good tourist, how to be a good traveler, what to see, what to eat, what to do, how to spend your time, how to get around. But the other half of it was going to be for those of you who are interested in moving, even temporarily, whether it's for college, whether it's maybe you're working abroad, you found a job abroad, or a semester abroad, which I guess is college, or anything like that. We wanted to kind of put in a number of pieces of information that were helpful to you.
Especially if you're lucky enough to have recent family who are Italian and you can have a citizenship here like Nathaniel does, basically through your family. It's really big and also very confusing sometimes. So
super confusing.
We'll talk about that.
Absolutely. So if this is interesting to you, it would be a huge privilege, a pleasure, a lovely thing for you to do, to leave us a comment or send us a comment, or we're going to have a poll. If you listen to Spotify, we'll have a poll there basically asking, is this something that you find interesting? Because if it is something you find interesting, we'll put out an episode a week until we run out of material on this. But if it's something that you're like, I'm really only here for the travel advice, honestly, I don't really care about renting in Italy or, living in Italy or anything like that, then what we'll try to do is intermix these with the classic travel advice, as we've been doing for the last 40 odd episodes, because there's still more to talk about. Always.
There's always more to talk about when it comes to Italy.
And when it comes to creating content.
Yeah.
Just going back to that fun SEO storyline there. So yes, it would really be honestly a huge, huge help if you were to leave a comment or just send us a message. Instagram, as I mentioned, Only a Bag Podcast is our username on Instagram. And you can send us a comment form on our website, onlyabag.com. But it would be just a tremendous help.
Yeah, we want to know what you want to listen to.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's hop into it. This is going to be how to live in Italy. And this time, neither of us really had to do that much research, given the fact that we've looked into all of these avenues multiple times over the years. So, I mean, before choosing the avenue that was by far the easiest, if that makes sense.
Getting married?
Well, yeah,
For me?
for you. And then
Yes.
just, I don't know,
Just existing
just
for
existing for me. So super fortunate. We're going to get into that in a minute. And before we do get started, I just want to kind of throw out there, we do try to kind of keep things somewhat apolitical here at Only a Bag. I say like that we're like some brand, just because we realize that at least with the two of us, sometimes it's nice to, when you're not on like Reddit or the news or Twitter or
If
Blue
you're not
Sky.
listening to a news podcast or a political podcast, sometimes it's better to not listen to politics at all.
Exactly. It's nice to have like a little space away from things. So we do try to create that a little bit here at Only a Bag. I like saying that like we're like a physical thing. And in this episode, we're going to still try that. However, when you're talking about living in a place, you are essentially talking about immigration. And whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Europe or Italy, it's not a conversation that you can have kind of without just gently getting into the politics of it, simply because it is a hot button topic everywhere.
Of course. And I think often, no matter what country people come from, often people do move to a new home country because of the politics of their origin country. So
Absolutely.
sometimes
Oh,
it just goes
absolutely.
hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think that, well, I'm thinking that kind of describes even, we talked about just a second ago, like my ancestors are Italian immigrants, but they left sort of famine and political structures and things like that to go to the States. So it's a bit like, you know, I mean, I think a lot of them too went to South America, even in my family, and then ended up in the States because they had family there. Like, why not? Let's just stay there, kind of thing. So it very much, I think, is you're just moving somewhere else to find somewhere better. And I think as a listener, it might be the same for you, whether it's a political thing, whether it's a lifestyle thing, whether it's I mean, Darcy and I joke all the time that we're going to move to France one day just simply because we like croissants so much. And it's, I mean, honestly, at a certain point, it's like, yeah, that's a really good reason to move somewhere, because if you want to wake up every morning and have an amazing croissant, there's only like 3 or 4 countries you can do that in, and Italy is not one of them.
No.
So that being said, I did also want to talk about other countries very, very, very briefly, because Italy, I think, is, well, I think there's an expectation when it comes to Europe. Like, it's easy to move to Europe in terms of my father, who is a 60s traveler at heart. I think, he's like, basically traveling in the 60s, which, I mean, he was 4 to 14 in the 60s. So it's not like he did a lot of traveling back then.
But he has that mentality, that vibe.
He has that mentality of you get in a van in England and you end up in Turkey a couple weeks later, or Afghanistan.
Well,
or
he did that, right? He drove from England with his friends to what, Morocco?
to Morocco,
Okay.
which is, kind of close, I guess.
Right, it's not Turkey. I'm just saying that's not some
No, but
a random dream he had. That is a real practical thing he did.
And I think a lot of it too was not open borders in terms of you couldn't just cross a border, you still had to get a passport stamped, but it was very, he has a different,
Loosey-goosey.
very loosey-goosey, different connotation. I know when I first came here to Italy in 2015, 14, I was having a lot of trouble figuring out how to stay and make money. And again, because I was coming off this idea, like even the first time I traveled, I was on this idea of, oh, I can just pick up a job as I go along. And surprisingly, you can't. And I mean, I would, because I was like, oh, like that's literally how just I and a lot of other people grew up in terms of, I mean, when I say that in terms of even like American travelers, it's like, oh yeah, your parents did that. Like my parents did that. They would have come to Italy. They came, they went to UK, they went to France. Like my uncle went all over Europe and he just like picked up odd jobs along the way. And because it was like, you can do that. You can a transient worker or whatever it is. It's just, you can get a work visa and do that. But now it's, you have to.
Or just do it off the books.
Or just do it off the
and
books.
People were a lot more open to that, I think, back in
And
the
now,
day.
oh yeah, and that's the thing. Now it's and I think when I got here the first time, I was asking around and they're like, no one will be willing to take you because they are going to get in a lot of trouble if anybody finds out. Like we're talking thousands and thousands of euros of fine punishment. We're talking about, potentially getting licenses rescinded. Like there is no way someone's willing to take you.
If you don't have a work visa, to be fair.
That too. And yeah, if you don't have a work visa, and to be fair, like who's hiring an 18, 19-year-old kid who knows nothing?
Right.
Like that's not great workforce type material. So with that being said, there was an idea. I think I first came to Europe, and I think I've talked about this in other episodes, especially some of the first episodes, that when I first went to Europe in 2013, I traveled under this illusion that like you could stay €5 a night at a pension and you could take a overnight train somewhere. And we've talked about that before. There really are no overnight trains that you can stay on train overnight kind of thing, or they're coming back slowly. But a lot of them were replaced in preference for the high speed trains, which unrelated. Sorry, this is like tangent after tangent. You people are probably like, what is going on? Can this guy find it? I just had a cup of coffee. But in terms of interesting news, we talked about it in this last episode. There is now a train Paris to Berlin. It is high speed. However, it's high speed only in France. It's like 340 kilometers an hour, which is like 200 miles an hour, give or take. It drops down to like 200 kilometers an hour in Germany because the tracks.
How fast in?
100 and change, maybe
Okay,
a little
so
under
still
100.
fast. Okay.
Still fast.
But
First faster than driving for sure. But I think it has to do with the age of the tracks and the age of the equipment. And they're like, we can't go that fast. Same thing in Italy. You're going to find that between Reggio Calabria and Salerno, the high-speed train can only go, I think, 240 kilometers an hour. But once you go from Salerno to like Rome or Rome to Milan, I believe.
the Rome to Milan train is super fast.
Yeah, you can get to that 350 or whatever it is, 330 kilometers an hour. So,
Although there is talk, I think we've mentioned this before, but there is talk of, there's actual plans to make a high-speed rail in the part of the south where we are, which will go from Naples or Salerno down to Reggio Calabria.
which would be nice, yeah, adding a couple extra stops.
But that's going to take many, many years.
Yes.
But that is the plan to sort of reinstitute or reaffirm some of these train lines that haven't been used since the 80s and make them fast train lines.
Absolutely. So check back in 2035. So all this was to say, this initial tangent I went off of was when I went traveling, I had a lot of these misconceptions, preconceptions that were very wrong. One of them was, if I really like it in a place, I could just stay there. And very, very quickly, people will tell you, no, you cannot. Please leave. So that being said, I wanted to also address Spain and Portugal, and that was the original beginning of this. Was let's talk about some other countries. Spain recently they released their plans to charge 100% tax on houses purchased in Spain by basically non-residents. So whether you're a resident or a citizen there, you can purchase a house at house price. But if you are not a resident or a citizen of Spain and you purchase a house, there will be an additional 100% tax on top of it, mainly to cut down on the investment from some foreign nationals, essentially. And I think actually I mentioned this to you the other day, and you're like, that's an insane amount of money.
I did. I was very surprised. 100% is obviously double your house price.
Exactly. And which is great, actually. Thank you for throwing that out there in terms of math. Yes, that is double. So if you buy a house for whatever, 400,000, it becomes 800,000.
Which is a big difference. For me, maybe not for all of you.
Well, and I think that's the thing, though. We've talked about this before, where we live even in southern Italy. There are plenty of houses that are 10, 15, 20,000 euros. So adding an extra 10, 15, 20,000 euros on top of that for someone who does make 140, 150,000 pounds if they're from England, or $250,000 if they're from Australia, it's not like a huge difference in terms of, I mean, it's not a rounding error, but it's like, okay, that's a little bit more I have to save for.
Especially if you're buying it as a second home, meaning
Exactly.
an additional home. It's not your primary residence. It's not a place where you absolutely need to be because you need a roof over your head. If it's
Exactly.
a vacation home or a second home, that is different.
And that's, I think, the big thing. This is essentially to cut down on vacation homes that are owned by non-Spanish, anyone who's not a Spanish resident or citizen, which helps because they're having a huge crisis right now with housing, simply just in cities, outside of cities. It's impossible to live there, which it means it's impossible for people to work there.
Why is that?
Mostly Airbnb.
Okay.
It's mostly, a lot of it has to do with people buying up houses that don't use them, and then when they're not using them, they rent them out.
Right. Okay. That makes
And
sense.
it's even not sometimes, like, it seems like it's not even large owner. It's not like one person owns, or one company owns like 400, 500 apartments. It's just if everyone's renting out their thing because they're not staying there, then.
If one person has 3 homes and they use 2 of them as Airbnbs,
Exactly.
that's not great.
And
right?
if also a couple thousand people are doing that, then you have an issue.
I have a question, if I'm not jumping ahead.
You are not?
So
I have no idea. What am I saying?
foreign nationals buying a home in Spain, so not Spanish residents or citizens, does that mean if you're Italian or French that you're paying 100% tax on top?
It looks like it does, and they not clarified whether or not that's going to be only a tax on non-EU citizens, but right now it seems pretty specifically, if you're not Spanish, you're paying more.
Okay. That's a good clarification, because I think a lot of the time, I don't know if this is my misconception, but it seems that sometimes when an EU country says that, if you're foreign, you can't have this thing here, what they mean is if you're outside the EU, it's a penalty to you. But this seems like it is, if you're outside of Spain, it's a penalty.
Yeah. And something for what it's worth, housing prices on the Spanish coast are pretty much what you might find like in America in terms of it's a couple $100,000 for an apartment or a house. It's 4 or 500,000 for like an apartment, like not the entire apartment, like an apartment, not the building, but like the unit, I guess, in a thing. So they're quite expensive. So, they are trying to make it so it's absurdly expensive for most people. And the other country is Portugal. They used to be very famous for their golden visa program, which was essentially you purchase a piece of property for 250,000 euros and you get a residency visa. This residency visa could be used eventually to turn into citizenship if you maintained residence long enough. So they killed that back in 2023. So this is like 2 years ago.
What was the residency, the time you had to spend there? What was the requirement on that? Do you remember?
Well, that was the funny thing. So you only had to spend 7 days there in the first year or 14 days there at some point in the 2 years after that. So
in order to get residency or citizenship?
In order to keep your residency visa.
That's absolutely insane.
Especially because you right now you as a resident have to be here for 1 day more than whatever it is. Like I think it's 187 or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
It's like 1 day more than half the year is what you have to be here to be a resident. So which makes sense. That's what residency is. Let's say you spend most of the year in a place, you're a resident. And Portugal was giving out this sort of golden visa, which was essentially buy your vacation home here and we'll give you citizenship one day.
Right, which that is very golden. That is absolutely insane to me. I mean, great. If you got that opportunity, amazing for you. But that is big.
And that's the thing. And it was supposed to like help them out of this is I think in like 2012, 2013. So it's kind of still coming off that 2007 financial crisis. Again, this is not technically politics, but this is where politics does enter. So they were trying
The financial crisis did happen,
Yes.
and it affected a lot of the world.
And I think it affected places like Portugal and Spain and Italy tremendously because they were already not doing super. So I say this all because there's a lot of different ideas that are not ideas, I guess. There are a lot of different plans that were in place in order to encourage growth in terms of people coming back. So I think which is all to say, on the surface, when you look at Europe, it's easy to look at it and say, oh, we could probably move somewhere in Europe. Like once you move, and as you know, it's true, once you move somewhere and get citizenship somewhere, you can live anywhere. Like you're a resident, you're a resident anywhere, but you can live freely anywhere. So if there's a country where it's easier to get citizenship, like Portugal, all of a sudden you can get your citizenship there. And then this is pre-Brexit, but move to England or move to Scotland or move to France, Germany, whatever is in the EU. So it does make it a little bit like, oh, that created an interesting doorway into the entire European Union. So moving on to Italy. For those of you listening, there are by and large 4 ways to become a resident of Italy, which means when you Google that question, how do I live in Italy? You need a visa is the biggest thing. And obviously you cannot live on a tourist visa in Italy. You can try. Doris and I have tried. You live for 3 months and then you go somewhere else for 3 months and you come back for 3 months and you keep doing that basically as long as you don't spend more than 180 days in Italy in 1 year, you're good.
But you can't do 6 months at a time, right?
You can't do 6 months at a time.
You have to do
90
3
days
on,
at a time.
3 off.
Yeah. So you can't do more than 90 days at a time. And it has to, be like essentially, they look back at the last 180 days and they ask, have you spent more than 90 days in that time? Mm-hmm. So in theory, technically, you could go I think you could go like Italy one day and then the next day, cross the border into Tunisia and then go back and then go, 1 day on, 1 day off kind of thing. But that's obviously not, I think because even Slovenia is in the EU, so that wouldn't, or Schengen zone, excuse me.
Yeah, there's really no practical way of doing it.
Not for Italy. I think there might have been for other things, but even so, a lot of the border agents will still if you don't have at least 2 weeks, I think is what it is, left of validity, they won't let you in, which makes sense because again, a big thing is just preventing people from coming in and then doing that sort of, I misplaced my passport, which was a big thing of coming in here with only a couple weeks left, misplacing your passport, and then
air quotes is what Nathaniel's doing.
Oh yeah, sorry, there's a lot of air quotes happening, and then you get a new passport and you tell them I just got here a couple weeks ago, so then they'd give you a whole fresh 90 days, which for the cost of a new passport, which is like $200. It's essentially, it was like a little way of scamming the system, which you cannot do anymore. So I say that like I'm sad. So in Italy, there are essentially 4 ways that we're going to talk about, but one of them we're going to very briefly talk about and get way more into depth in another episode. But it's citizenship, work visa, student visa, or digital nomad visa. The citizenship one seems really complicated, but essentially, as we mentioned earlier, if you have family that is Italian, and when I say family, I do mean like, I think it's like my great great grandfather is Italian. So when we're comparing like where we're from, I have the most tenuous sort of links to Italy possible.
But it has to be within a certain. There are stipulations to that. It's not just like, oh, a random family member that I have is Italian. Your mom did all the work, and it is quite specific. And hopefully, we'll do an episode on that, even if it's a mini.
We definitely will. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think we're going to get way more into that. But essentially, as you were saying, there are a couple of restrictions to it. And the news most recently, some of you who might be following this, if you haven't followed this, then obviously this would not have come up to you. But if you've been following it, you might have heard recently there was some news that came out that prevented a lot of people from applying through this method. And essentially it was if the person who has the actual link to Italy, so the person who's actually born in Italy, if they renounce their Italian citizenship before their children turned 18, then their children lost the link to citizenship. If they did it after their children turned 18, then those children who are now adults still had their link to citizenship. So what happened was a lot of Italians coming over to the United States, they'd come over, they have kids or they brought their kids. And that's also kind of where it gets a little shifty too, because I think it's if they had kids, those kids in the States, those kids are still Italian by birth. But if kids came over born in the States, then they don't need anything from their parents, if that makes sense. Okay. So if it's like your grandfather was only 2 when he came over from Italy, it's fine. He's good. He's Italian. But if your grandfather was born here is where we're talking about. We're not in the States right now. If your grandfather was born in the States and it's his father that came over and his father renounced, then you're out of luck.
Okay.
It's a little complicated, especially without a diagram or like a little cartoon to explain it. But essentially what was happening is a lot of Italian immigrants or immigrants from anywhere were renouncing their citizenship to their home country, mostly in an attempt to be more American.
To naturalize themselves, which is
exactly.
Very understandable.
Well, especially like around World War I, World War II, you don't really want to be Italian or German or a lot of other things in America. So it's kind of like, ooh, I'm fully American. I have renounced every tie I have to America. So
to your home country.
Italy, or Germany. So there's a lot of that happening, I think. And so a lot of people found out like that was their parents. Their parents who, whether they came over in the late 1800s or the early 1900s, renounced before their kids were legally adults, and then they lost that link to citizenship essentially. Which again, not to get too much into politics, again, it does kind of briefly touch it. Italy right now is having a bit of a, what is it called when basically people aren't being born? Is it just people aren't being born?
The opposite of a baby boom.
Yeah.
There's a name for it. Yeah.
So they're having a lack of babies being born essentially, and a lot of that it's a multitude of reasons, but mostly it's a lot of people who are young end up leaving Italy because there's better jobs elsewhere, there are better paying jobs elsewhere. And then sometimes a lot of people just don't feel like, it's their parents were having kids and they're like, I don't really want to have kids. I'm fine.
I think it's the same. There's a slump in babies being born in a lot of places in the world. And I think a lot of it is the same as it is in the US, that a lot of people are concerned about where the world is going.
For sure.
Climate wise, politically, there's just a lot of uncertainty. People are also choosing to have children later in life. So that looks like a slump when, your group of 20-year-olds across the country aren't having children. They're waiting until they're 35. So it's very similar reasons to other places in the world.
Not to mention too, just in terms of, I mentioned jobs, but a lot of people we know that don't want kids because like, I can't afford a kid. Like
right.
My parents were making money to afford a kid. I am not making that money. So yeah, there's a tons of reasons, which is all to say Italy is trying to promote people having kids, but at the same time, they're closing a lot of doors to immigration. Yeah. So it's like, and whether it's people becoming renaturalized, which is what the process I went through, whether it's just people becoming immigrants, just arriving, applying for residency, then applying for citizenship, whether it's there are some things they were changing, even people marrying in were becoming more difficult. So it's a little bit strange because like on the surface, it's kind of like they're saying, we want more Italians. And everyone's like, cool, we all want to be Italian. And like, oh no, not like you.
Right.
We want...
The Italian government is very nationalistic at the moment.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. So, which is all to say, this can be a process. And even the news I just explained, this whole, if your link was under 18 at the time of the person who gave birth to them or was their father, if their parent, this is kind of complicated without
if the Italian parent renounced their citizenship when their children were under 18,
Right. If that's overturned, because that was just a court ruling, if that is overturned at a later date, then a lot of people are suddenly now back on the docket. But if it's not overturned, then it's going to stay. Who knows the new government? It might be overturned. It's always it's one of those things you have to kind of keep your eye on.
And I don't know that this needs clarification, but just to clarify that point, it's not if you are someone who has regained your citizenship through this right to citizenship, if you're already a citizen, your citizenship is not being taken away.
Oh God, no. Yeah,
this
you're
is
good.
just for people who were on the list waiting to get their citizenship confirmed, or people who, if you haven't even applied yet, but you were looking to do it and now this has been announced, that's who this is affecting. No one is getting their citizenship stripped away, just to clarify.
Correct. And I think too, if you're there are some stories of people who are in the process who are being approved and some people who are in the process and being denied. Mm-hmm. It seems to be mostly up to whoever's doing the approving and the denying in terms of some people some like judges or the notaries or whoever it is seem to be like, no, you were already like, it goes back to the point is a lot of judges and a lot of lawyers here will tell you that you are already Italian. You're just proving your heritage. You're proving mm-hmm. that you are, but you already have it. You already technically have a passport. You have the citizenship. You have everything. You're just proving to the government that you are, but you're a lot of the lawyers here will act as if you're already Italian. So they're just kind of clearing up some paperwork. Right. So that's why a lot of these were being pushed through anyway, because they're like, yeah, but they've already proved it. We already found the documents. All we had to do is stamp a name on it. So let's just get these people through. And then the next one will have to wait. If it's interesting to you, if you know you have Italian heritage, and again, we'll go into an episode later, this person, whoever it is in your family, would have to be born. It seems like there's a little bit of confusion around a lot of this, I will say. Some people say they have to be born after Italy became a country, which is in like 1860s. Some people say they just have to be living in Italy after Italy became a country, because obviously it's not like when Italy becomes a country and they strip away your Napolitano or your Sicilian or your Milanese, whatever it is, citizenship, they have to give you another one. Otherwise, you are a person without
free agent.
Yeah. So they have to give you Italian citizenship. But if you're already living in the States at the time, or if that person was already living in the States at the time, then that person might not actually get Italian citizenship. They might have just been like, oh, overlooked or something. So they'd have to be living or born around 1860s, after 1860s, and then they just basically could not have renounced it at any point. If they renounced it privately to themselves, you're good. It doesn't count. If they renounce it publicly in front of an official from Italy, you're not as good. And that's pretty much it. You basically get together your birth records, death records, marriage certificates, everything proving your link to that person. You get them all translated. You send them to if you do it in the States, you just send it to the embassy. If you do it in Italy, it is so much quicker. I think the waiting list in this, like I know like basically again, without getting too political, the waiting list in San Francisco, for instance, was 8 years in 2015. In 2016, the waiting list went to like 20 years, as a lot of people wanted to apply for the citizenship. Same thing with Miami. Same thing, I think, with Texas. I think
It's spiked again, hasn't it?
It has spiked again.
Okay.
And it's only because you can only do it in 4 or 5 embassies in the United States. As long as there's like consulates, I guess. Mm-hmm. And there's only a few of them, and they only have a couple of judges working, and it takes years to get an appointment. Conversely, you can get it done in any Italian town or city. And that's what a lot of people do. You take 3 months off work, you get a visa to come do this, you bring all your paperwork, there's a special visa specifically for I'm here to claim my citizenship. So it works much quicker, and then you become a citizen of Italy as well as a resident of that town. But then when you leave, all you do is you just change your residency to wherever you're living in the States or in South America or in Australia or in Britain. And it's typically quite quick and quite easy. So if that's something that's interesting to you, we're going to have a whole episode on this later. But essentially, this is all to say, if you know you have it doesn't have to be living at all. If you know you have any Italian heritage whatsoever, you might be able to reclaim that and get an Italian passport, mm-hmm. which is awesome. The second one is a work visa. This is going to be one of those ones that works for no one, basically. Nobody listening to this, I'm willing to bet. Again, this is going to be one of those fun new episodes that we'll do at some point later. But essentially, how it works is, I said work a lot. How it works is every year or two, the Italian government will open up these applications, and they'll say we have and it's usually X amount of jobs and X type of jobs to fill.
So we talked about this yesterday,
mm-hmm.
Before we were recording the podcast. I had no idea that the window for this was open so rarely. I really was under the assumption that a job had an opening And obviously, people, Italian companies want to fill that job with Italians first. But if there's no Italian who can fulfill that position, I thought they'd just open it up to whoever and give a work visa. I'm making this sound easier than it is, but I just assumed that if you went through the steps, you could get a work visa any time of year when this business needed to fill this position. Evidently not. It is much more scant.
It is. It's basically, they only have, I think, 30,000 visas. And that's 30, not like just for the United States, to be clear, that's for everywhere. And obviously there is a big push to sort of hire people who already either know the language. So that might be people who are, I mean, you don't need obviously a visa if you're coming from anywhere in the EU, but like, I guess if you already know Italian, you're kind of ahead on the list, I guess is the point there. But it doesn't seem like there's any real, besides that, it's difficult because, like, for instance, people in the States who work tech jobs, like tech sector, whether you're in Denver or San Francisco or Austin or whatever, you would think those are really highly desirable in Italy, and they are, but they pay like a fourth as much.
That's
so
why Italians have really bad websites.
It really is, because nobody wants to pay somebody to design their website. It's awful. And I think that's
This is 1991.
This is 1991. They have their kid doing it, and he's 14, and he's just figured out WordPress, and it's just got colors, and there's music that plays when you go to the website.
Grandpas are making the sites. I think if a 14-year-old did it, it'd be better.
That's a really good point. I'm making fun of 14.
No shade to grandpas.
Yes. It's somebody who grew up with MySpace, and was like, that was like the epitome of the website. So it's like a friends list on the side. Did
grandpas grow up with MySpace? Are we grandparents?
We were a little bit after MySpace.
We were a little bit after MySpace.
We were, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you could be very young grandparents with MySpace.
Okay.
So that being said, this work visa is essentially 30,000 of them, only open every few years. They'll open this up. You all have to apply, and then you get approved. It's not very clear, and this is why we're going to go into it later. The things I'm unclear on is if it's an American company, for instance, let's say it's a college in the States, can they hire an American, or somebody else, but let's just say it's an American if you're listening to this, Australian college, British college, because there's like the British School of Arts, there's a couple of American colleges in Rome. So there's a lot of universities. Like, can they hire from their home country without having to, they still need a work visa, obviously, but without having to go through that same process? Or does it all draw from the same pool? How difficult is it? These are the things we want to go into the website, or on the episode, not the website. Got me thinking about websites now. This is what we want to go into in that episode on work visas. But essentially, it's a very small, limited pool for work visas. And it seems quite difficult to get in. And part of that is because it is expensive to hire a non-Italian for a job here, like just in terms of taxes. They have to pay so much extra for tax. It's also a lot of times taxes are scale on how old you are. So it's kind of like, and how long you've been with the company. So it's sometimes better to hire somebody who's 22, fresh out of college, rather than somebody who's 32. They have to pay more taxes on you. It becomes this whole thing. So oftentimes it can be a little dicey trying to find a job in Italy, for better or worse. Sometimes it's better. If you can work abroad, in theory, that's better. But, as people talk about, like on digital nomad subreddits and stuff, even that's where it gets a little tricky. And we'll get into that in just a second in terms of like, can you work from an American company based in America while you're in Italy? So we'll get into that. Third is a student visa. Mm-hmm. This might be the easiest possible way to become like a resident or even a citizen. And that's something I want to mention here. For Italy, it looks like it doesn't matter which visa you have, unless it's tourist visa. That one matters very much. But it doesn't matter which resident visa you have, but all the years you spend in Italy will work towards your citizenship. So Italy has a law basically saying if you spend 10 years in Italy, you can now apply for citizenship. Again, not to get political, but this goes back to that thing of like, you guys want Italians here. You want more Italians. In 10 years, people know the language, they know the culture, they know the history, they know everything about it, especially when you're in like Rome or Milan or a big city and you're, part of the fabric, or even in a small town, because everybody we know in a small town who are immigrants here speak Italian, they speak dialect, they have jobs, they have families. It's like, but you still have to wait another, X amount of years just to get the citizenship part of it. So it's a lot. There's a big push to kind of reduce it from 10 years down to like 7 or even 5 years, because they're thinking like it's a pretty big commitment, even 5 years, like, because you don't want to get denied citizenship after 10 years of living in a place. That just be kind of heartbreaking.
Absolutely.
So it looks like all residency visas, whether it's a work visa, student visa, family reunification visa, et cetera, they're all applicable for those years you need to accrue in order to apply for citizenship. So if you came here for 4 years as a student, amazing. And if you want to spend another 4 years as like a doctorate or whatever comes after a student, Is it doctor? No, it's a master's, I guess, and then
doctorate. Yeah.
post-grad, and then
I'm not
doctor.
sure how the levels are in Italian. They're slightly different, but if you're at an American school, then you're probably getting the degrees in that level.
Exactly. So in theory, yeah, you could. I mean, it looks like from all my research, it looks like you can absolutely. A couple of these like immigration lawyer websites were just like, yeah, if that's what you want to do, go for it. There's nothing stopping you. So it also looks like the student visa is by far the easiest to get. And for those of you listening, if you are all interested in living in Italy, I think this is actually the way to go, in my opinion. If you have any inkling, like at all, let me rephrase this. If you have any inkling beyond the 3 months that a tourist visa allows you, then I think the student visa is the way to go. We're going to go into this way more in depth in a new episode, but essentially what you'll need is an acceptance letter from a college, proof that you speak either English or Italian, proof that you have some funds. It's usually, I say some funds because when we do the episode, I'll give you the actual amount, but it's usually, you have to make more than the federal minimum wage, which is about 9,000 euros a year in Italy.
Either make more or have more in your account.
Exactly, yeah. But you're allowed to also work while you're here. You just can't work more than 20 hours. So you can kind of...
And it's specific jobs?
Yeah, you can't like be a lawyer on your free time, but you can work as like a barista or, okay. It's like you can't take high value jobs, but you can take every other kind of job as long as you work it for less than 20 hours a week. Okay. So it's not great because again, I just said that the average of the low income is 9,000 euros a year, like the federal minimum kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Some people make well less than that. Some people make obviously a lot more than that. But that's like that's what they mandate. You have to make more than, but that's doing the math there. That's not very much money. That's like a couple $100 a month. So that is all basically, all you need is the acceptance letter, the fact you speak English, and I should mention is something you were also surprised. A solid handful of universities in Italy offer an entire degree in English.
That blows my mind. That's a mind-blowing sound.
Well, it is kind of wild. I mean, like, because maybe, I don't know. I have not gone to college in America, so you could tell me more. But I don't think you offer, like, America doesn't offer an entire degree in Spanish or French or
no, I don't
German
think so.
or any Mandarin.
There might be some schools, which I hope, because that would be great, that offer a full degree in Spanish because of our proximity to Spanish-speaking countries. But I don't think there are many. And obviously, like, English-speaking countries are not that close to Italy. You can't, I don't know if you can get a degree in French in Italy. It's just that the power of the English language it's pretty strong. I don't know if I love it.
Might be able to, because I think you just mentioned that as a French, I believe too, in the north, I can't remember which region, Bolzano maybe, or maybe it's Piemonte, but you can do a lot of the federal things in French or Italian, depending on which you prefer. So the driving test.
Things. Oh, okay.
So like driving tests, college thing, any applications, et cetera, et cetera. You can all do that in French if you want. If it's because a lot of the villages still speak French instead of Italian.
Right. So that's fascinating.
In theory, maybe you could, there's a college. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting, because these are not like Phoenix University that offer English only. No, this is like
big universities.
Rome, Turin, Milan, Bologna, Pisa, I think Florence, I think Siena, Perugia has a university called University of Foreigners, which is, I think all of their degrees are offered in English. It is specifically for foreigners who are not obviously Italian. So it's quite a small university in terms of only a few thousand students, but it's also a famous-ish university in terms of it's famous. So in terms of fame, it's quite well known. So there are a lot of options in terms of, and these are not like, obviously, Rome, Siena, Florence. These are beautiful cities. It's not like you're in the middle of nowhere learning, about business management or something. I mean, you have a really decent choice to take from. And of course, again, we'll get more about how the colleges work in Italy during that episode, because they're a little bit confusing in terms of like, they're very large, the classes. It's much more a lecture. It doesn't seem, from the people we've talked to, there's not really like asking the professor a question or anything like that. It's like 100 students 100 and something students in this auditorium. You're all listening to a lecture. You're all taking notes. And then oftentimes at the end of the year, you take these oral exams in front of a bunch of professors and they quiz you on things. And then if you pass, great. But you have to pay to not take the oral exams. So if you try to put it off, it's a whole thing. But essentially, this visa, you have to take a 40-hour week course of classes. Mm-hmm. So you have to be a full-time student is what they request. You can't be a part-time student. Darcy was looking into this as like maybe an option before we got married, but because we don't live next to a university and relocating was too expensive, it wasn't really a possibility. So that is to say, 40 hours a week, you can work 20 additional if you'd like to make some money. You do need proof of lodging, which is fine. If you get accepted by a university, they will put you up. I mean, I think that's part and parcel of the whole university thing.
Most universities do have housing buildings.
Exactly. And if you'd like to live off campus, super easy to do so. There are a ton of apartments that are only for students. The Italian government offers a tax break for homeowners who rent out one of their houses to students. So it's quite popular, especially in college towns, as we have learned, because we've found so many cheap apartments. And then you go there and like, oh, but if you're not students here, you can't actually rent here. And we need documentation that you're a student. So it's quite affordable, a couple €100 a month. So this is all to say is like, I'm putting this out there to those listeners who are either retired and are just like, yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, I'll stay there for a year. I'll learn art history or whatever it is. I mean, why not? That's a great way to take some classes, whatever. I mean, if you bomb all the classes, who cares? It doesn't seem like, I mean, the visa isn't, you have to maintain like a B average. It's like bomb the classes, try again next year. I don't know. You should probably go to these classes, to be honest. But which is nice that it's not like you have to be a smart student. You could just be a student. But I was also thinking for people like myself, like a couple of years ago, I was working at a grocery store and I was looking for ways to, this is before I realized how Italian we were. It's like one of the things we always vaguely said it, like, oh, we're Italian. Like I am a 6 foot something and blonde with blue eyes. I do not look Italian. Even in Italy, speaking Italian, people are like, oh, it's German. I'm like, it's not. I promise you. So I'm not like I've disbelieved it, but it's kind of like,
I mean, a lot of people say that, you know, and there might be very much Italian in your blood, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily know who their Italian ancestors are.
Yeah, like one person 8 generations ago was like vaguely, like his name was Giuseppe.
My family with being Irish.
Yeah.
Like my family's really into Irish culture, but our Irish people are pretty far back.
You're just super pale.
Yes.
That's what you got going for you. So no, I think that's the thing. I mean, that would have been perfect for me a few years ago. The issue, of course, is needing the 9,000 or 10,000 euros in the account, which was a bit of a hang up for me a couple of years ago. Hasn't changed much. No, so that's a big hang up getting approved, but I looked at the acceptance rating and we'll go into this more in the other episodes. But I mean, we're talking like 60 to 80% acceptance rates for students because it's, free college in Italy. And it doesn't look like you have to pay very much. Again, I'm going to have figures for you in that episode, but I know that England, for instance, charges their students. And I know like Scotland, for instance, does not charge their students, but they will charge English students. And I'm pretty sure they charge American students as well because it's reciprocal. Like if you charge our students, we'll charge yours. I don't think Italy charges anybody. The one major thing to actually look out for if you're listening to this and you're getting excited is to double check that the school you are going to be applying to is an actual accredited school. This does not work if you are going to something that's not an accredited school. For instance, there's an art academy called the Florence Academy of Fine Art or Florence Academy of Art. It sounds really cool. It's got amazing workshops. They're phenomenal. They are not an accredited school, which means they cannot vouch for you on a student visa.
Right. It's not a full university. It's like a painting atelier, essentially.
Exactly. However, there are cooking schools that you can apply to that will give you this, that you do grant you the student visa. So it's a little bit like some very thin lines being drawn in the sand here. However, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I could live a year in, Florence and walk to the cooking school and, work at the cafe. And if you're getting excited by that, definitely a possibility and definitely something to explore.
And specifically talking about Fedora, if you are a pastry chef or a wannabe pastry chef, look into Fedora. It is a pastry school in Florence, and it's fully accredited.
I think so, because they have a ton of American students there. And I'm like,
I believe the courses are taught in English.
Yeah, I think so.
Again, we'll double check that just because it seems like a cool program.
It is a cool program.
But on the note of colleges and universities, so there are some American universities in Italy. Like one, for instance, is the John Cabot University
in Rome.
And they charge more American prices for their schooling. It's like $30,000 a year.
If you're American or Canadian, it's 30. If you are not American or Canadian, so anybody else, it's 20.
Okay. But conversely, there are Italian universities, which, to my knowledge, charge you mostly not to take a test, not a yearly fee in order to go to school.
And that's what I've heard. I mean, like, because sometimes we talked about the healthcare when people say Italy has free healthcare. I'm like, it's not free. It still costs something. It's just very, very, very reduced. It's, subsidized by the taxes you pay, but you still have to, pay the $20 or whatever to see the doctor. Everyone who's talked about college, it says it's free. And we're like, well, but kind of free or free? Like, no, like free. Like you don't pay anything. I'm like, what do you pay for? Like, and I think you have to pay for lodging and stuff. Like there's some, again, whatever you'd pay for rent kind of thing. But it seems to be genuinely zero money down.
We'll double check all of this before we get into our episode fully on, having a student visa.
But this is just kind of get those juices flowing for you. If you're like, I'm kind of excited about the idea of maybe wanting to try living somewhere else.
Yeah, I would have looked. I don't know if I would have done it, but I definitely would have looked into this whenever I was looking at colleges, because, I mean, like I said, I don't know that at 17 I would have been like, let's go to a foreign country where I don't know anybody. But it would have been so great to know that this was an option far less expensive than what I chose in the U.S. and potentially much more mind expanding and just a great option.
And yeah, I think that's the thing. It's something that is available for people to choose or to not choose, obviously. But I didn't go to college, obviously. Had I known this was an option, I would have gone there. I did find out that the University of Iceland has this like fairies classes, and I was really interested in that. I don't know why I thought I'd be taught in English. It is not taught in English.
And Icelandic seems like a very difficult language to learn.
To pick up on the side.
Yeah.
To be fair, I'm speaking as somebody who knows like remedial Italian. So I don't know. Maybe my brain's hardwired for Icelandic, like Percy Jackson in ancient Greek. This is a fun little reference for y'all. Please don't sue us, Rick. So,
Rick
Riordan.
I know, but you said it's like he's your friend.
Richard, if you will. Richard to his friends. The last is the digital nomad visa. This is kind of like part of what, again, the kind of third, very thin slice of the pie that Only Bag is about. I would classify both Darcy and I as digital nomads, despite the fact that Darcy works primarily oil on linen, stretched canvas herself, by the way. If you'd like to look at her prices, darcymeltonfineart.com, I think.
Yeah, I don't actually have prices up, but if you want a painting, please message me.
So not really a digital nomad, a nomad of...
I'm the least digital of digital nomads, but I do still fall into that category, yes.
And I think it's more like, I mean, in the sense of you have a website and the Instagram and
right.
et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
I'm
just bad at the digital part. I'm pretty good at the
the
analog
nomad
part.
Oh, the great at the nomad part. And so there is a literally brand new in terms of last year, called the Digital Nomad Visa. It was something announced, I think, in like March of 2022, or maybe 2023, and then fully sort of released in 2024.
They really drug their feet on it.
They did, and it's a bit half-baked in terms of classic Italian. They release something. They aren't sure what it is or how it works. And then there's no handbook on it, so other people aren't sure on what it is and how it works.
So Italian.
Yeah, and it's a little bit funky, and a lot of it's unsaid. We've talked about this before, like going into it very briefly. We've talked about it before. There is technically a visa if you are not married to an Italian citizen, but you've been in a long-term relationship with an Italian citizen. There is a visa you can get. That is essentially what Darcy and I have, which is a marriage visa, but it's like for long-term partnership visa. We were looking into that because the whole idea of getting married was like extra paperwork to translate, et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of felt like much easier. Turns out it's only for same-sex couples. It's not for different sex couples. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I'm like, what is the other one? So it was but it's one of the things you didn't know until you went and applied for it. And they're like, right, that's not for you. And I'm like, but where does it say that? Like, it doesn't say that, but that's what it's for. And it kind of feels like the digital nomad visa is a little bit like that in the sense of just people ask questions about like, I mean, just anything. How does the tax work? How much do I make? Where can I stay? Do I get it for, all the things that come around a visa are not listed. And everyone's like, does it fall more into a work visa or more into a study visa or more into a travel visa or more into what can I not do? Does it work? Does it count towards those 10 years towards citizenship? None of these are answered. We will go into that more in depth in the episode, but to very, very briefly talk about it for those of you who are considering being a digital nomad, but maybe don't love the idea of South America or Southeast Asia because those are the two most common digital nomad spots. I think Eastern Europe being the third. A big one I always push is Italy because Italy's great. I mean, I don't know. I think it's great. The pigs country, if you will. It's the Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. A lot of those are popular for digital nomad places. Terrible internet. We had snow the other day, and then the internet went from phenomenal to terrible because we use phone internet. So the biggest thing I think to know about any digital nomad visa, any tourist visa, is technically speaking, it is illegal to work in Italy on the tourist visa, which is a weird one because it is obviously impossible to prevent people from working on the tourist visa.
Right.
And I mean this not just like, some
And
of
it's
you
also
listening,
totally fine. Like if you come here for business or if you're doing emails and stuff while you're on vacation.
well, that's where it gets a little funky because, and again, when I say work, I do mean, and I should have clarified this, I mean, you can't be like on a Zoom call for work while you're here on a tourist visa, technically. You cannot work in Italy without paying taxes in any way, shape, or form, technically. And again, when you go to the digital nomad subreddit or any sort of forums or anything about digital nomad sort of lifestyle, there's a lot of technicalities thrown around, and it's kind of part and parcel. I mean, if you're thinking about like Southeast Asian stuff, a lot of countries do not have a digital nomad visa. What they do have is a tourist visa that you can be there on. You can use, you pop into the country, you pop back in, and it renews. And you can pretty much stay there vaguely without limit. And it seems like you're supposed to pay taxes, but no one does, or some people do. It's a little bit confusing. Italy is likewise, similarly, very confusing. And this is what I was talking about, the digital nomad visa. It does get a bit like, who am I paying taxes to and how much am I paying? Because a big portion of people's fear about Europe is higher taxes. I think Italy has, depending on what your job is, it's in the 30 to 40% range on your income, which it's not as high as it seems because your job will pay half of that usually, or half of the income or the federal
I believe
tax.
so, yeah.
So it's a little confusing just in terms of how much you're actually paying and what your take home actually is. But when you look at it in terms of, again, free college and very much reduced health cost in healthcare and things like that, then it kind of ends up kind of shaking out in the wash quite evenly. However, with this digital nomad visa, essentially they were trying to give a pathway for people who wanted to live in Italy and who wanted to work online. This could be their own business, they were self-employed, or it could be through a company based in the UK, in Australia, United States, wherever. Again, this is where it gets a little confusing because there's some tax questions. Who's paying the tax? Is the American company paying the taxes on you? Are you paying your own taxes? There is a reduced tax rate that was introduced. I think it's like 5% or 6% or something like that. I mean, really low for the first 5 years, and then it increases from there to like 10 or 12.
On your income?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then because Italy is part of an agreement with the US, you only have to pay income tax in one of the two countries. You and I pay in the States because, I mean, that's way easier than paying here because I don't even know how to pay taxes here, to be honest with you. We haven't even tried that. All I know is like if I make money, it's much easier paying the States because all of my money comes from the States in terms of I work for predominantly American clients and you sell all your work in Italy, or what am I talking about, in the United States. So it makes sense to pay there. However, if it's interesting, if you are a digital nomad, if you're somebody who likes to work off your computer, whether, again, this could be if you're partly retired, fully retired, if you're just, I mean, mid-30s and just not sure what you want to do, living where you're living, if you're young, if you want to kind of get started. And the reason I actually kind of kept the young one for the very end is with the digital nomad visa, you do need to make a minimum amount of money every month. I think it's like 1,500 euros or 1,600 euros. It's kind of a lot in terms of, I mean, not a lot in terms of like if you're one of those jobs that pay $100,000 to be a programmer, but if you're, I mean, I think a lot of people do call center work. I know a lot of like some Americans will be a call center for a bank or something, but they speak English, so it's good for international. They don't pay that much. They definitely don't pay the 1,500 a month to do that. It's just it's cheaper to live in wherever it is, Bali or Vietnam or something like that. So it's like you don't need that much. So there are some jobs that work and some that don't for this, essentially.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And I feel that it's quite complicated and, like you said, a little underbaked because
Very much underbaked.
there aren't a lot of details yet. And to me, it seems like Italy is kind of copying, what was it, Portugal, who had a digital nomad visa, or Spain?
I think Spain, actually.
Okay. Spain had one, and I think it backfired for them, if I'm not incorrect. Did it slightly backfire or no?
I don't think I mean, I don't recall it backfiring, but I don't. I think other countries trying to catch up to it more than it backfiring.
Oh, okay. I thought it kind of went hand in hand a bit with Spain's
I see what you're saying. Yes.
overcrowding with
Yes.
non-Spanish.
Backfired in that sense. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
They invited too many digital. Yeah. Portugal in the same way.
Okay.
Same thing with yes. The digital nomad visa, they invited too many people who were making what is a lot of money for Portugal. And I think at the time, by the way, just for what it's worth, an average income, I think in Lisbon, like 9 years ago, was like 800 euros a month. And that was enough to both pay rent and also buy food and pay utilities and things like that. And that's in the capital. But when digital nomads came and were easily paying the 400 a month, but they were able to get penthouses for 800 or 900 or 1,000, people jacked up the prices. And they have people who are like, I make 800 euros a month still. My rent is now 900 euros a month. I have to move. And you move way outside of Lisbon. So you're taking a car or you're taking a bus or you're taking a tram 2 or 3 hours into work every day. That backfired tremendously. And it's something that they're trying to shut down.
Cool. Okay. So, well, I mean, that's not
So
cool.
Italy did not learn
That's
from that. Italy
not
was like, that
great.
sounds awesome.
Right. So I'm a little confused as to why Italy is doing the digital nomad visa the way they are, I guess. But I do feel like they're kind of copying Spain and Portugal in that way. They're like, oh, dang, we need to hop on this bandwagon of the digital nomad visa, while also it seems to me essentially what the Italian government does know that they want is high earning internationals to come in and spend lots of money. But aside from that, I don't think they've really fully worked out the details.
I think what they're thinking is that people are going to come into Italy and want to live because they're trying to repopulate the small towns. And I think what they're trying to do is encourage people both through the digital nomad visa, but also I know some towns, we've talked about this before, and this is kind of what we're going to talk about later in terms of how do I live in Italy. This is going to be, again, part of a much larger cohesive. I found the word. I'm not cutting any of that out. We are 55 minutes in. But it's part of a much more cohesive thing. But essentially, some towns like Rieti will have not a digital nomad scheme, but if you live here, we will pay half your rent for the first few years. So if you're renting for 600, we'll cover 300 a month so that you live here. And
that's a good example of a place that I think has re-upped their sort of internet infrastructure. They've made sure that they're fully modernized in a way that you can be a digital nomad here, unlike some other towns that don't have very fast Wi-Fi and don't have the infrastructure for digital working.
And that's the thing, actually, as a last note, is a lot of Eastern Europe, one of the major things they did was created an incredibly comprehensive internet network in terms of everywhere you are has high-speed internet. I think Romania has some of the highest speeds in Europe. And it's insane. So, of course, they attract a lot of digital nomad workers because also most of these people play video games and they want like lower latency or their video calls or whatever it is. And you just want to instant connect with somebody. I know Italy was quite behind the times, and by and large, fiber has been rolled out to most areas, even where we live. We live in the middle of nowhere, and there is fiber to our local, I don't know what it's called, like the building, I guess. It's I wish I knew internet terms better, but essentially the fiber runs all the way up to our town, but because fiber isn't yet, you have to pay to get fiber from the building, the server area, to your house. That's still, for a lot of people, copper. So I think it's still technically like limited by that speed. But if you wanted to, you can pay to have fiber put in, and then all of a sudden you have fiber speeds and it's much faster. We use phone internet because it's way cheaper. I think it's $11 a month for unlimited internet. And I'm not going to say no to that.
Also, we don't own our home, so we're not.
Yeah, I'm not paying to put a cable in this house.
I don't even know if we're allowed to. But anyways.
Because you have to drill through the wall. It's a whole thing. It's like 8-foot thick stone wall here.
Yes.
They're never going to drill through. So that being said, yeah, but I think like Rome, for instance, I know that Florence, Siena, I think most major cities, if not all major cities, pretty much are fiber everywhere, rolled out everywhere. It's super fast internet. It's beautiful, high speed, lovely, zero latency, fantastic. So if you do want to work online, that is an option. But I do think my understanding is they're trying to encourage people to get out of the cities and out into repopulate these towns. Because I think the thought is like, don't you want to live like on the coast or in the mountains or... I mean, once you're done working for the day, you can go outside and enjoy nature. I'm saying that like I don't enjoy nature. I very much do. But I'm also thinking like, I feel like most of the digital nomads we know, when they're done working, they want to go to a bar or a club or party or drinks or something. So it's like, you're going to get that problem of a ton of people in cities and no one out in the hinterlands of Italy.
Right.
So we'll see. We're going to go into that more in depth in the episode titled, what is it called? Digital Nomad Visa? Should I get one?
Something like that.
We're also going to cover things too, like the $1 house that plays into part of this. Is that a real thing? Is that something you can actually buy? Can you purchase a house for €1? All of that and more will be covered in later episodes. If you like this, if you are enjoying this, if this is the kind of material or interest that you have, if you're trying to come and move to Italy and you'd like to know how, please, like I said, it'd be amazing if you could send us a comment, leave us a comment, maybe send us an email, a little comment box on the website. We're going to have a poll. If you do listen on Spotify, we're going to have a poll and it's going to be super simple. Do you enjoy this type of content? Yes or no? I might even throw another question in. Do you prefer, would you listen to both or one kind of thing, both our normal sights to see and things to do and things to eat? Only because we've been living here for, I think, like 4 or 5 years now. Again, some of it during COVID, so it definitely changed our perspective a bit at the beginning. But I think we have a lot of information about living, renting, getting set up, everything. And it does help take a lot of time out of the process because some of it is a nightmare.
Yes.
So if we can help you in any way, we'd be happy to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out.
I think that's everything. That is the episode. How to live in Italy, just under an hour. And now we're crossing that hour mark. So here we go.
Woo, there it was.
There it was.
Like the new year.
The new year. So thank you everyone so much to listen, to put up with me going on as slowly but clearly as possible.
That was good information. I thought that was pretty concise. And
Tried to jam pack it in there. Like I said, we didn't have to do too much research. We've had explored all of these options very much in depth. So, and we're going to do a ton of research though for the actual episodes. So if you are considering the work visa, the student visa, digital nomad, or even just citizenship, and you want to be fully prepared, we're going to get you as prepared as possible.
We're going to get into it and be as up to date as we can as well.
Absolutely. And this stuff, unfortunately though, if you're going to be, if you're listening in a year from when it's published, it's almost certainly going to be out of date. A lot of the stuff has changed in the last couple of months. I think there's an election coming up next year, year after 2027, something like that. So things might change again depending when you listen. It's all up in the air, unfortunately. It's Europe. It's really
we're going to try to keep you updated. And if you're listening to this, not in 2025, which is where we are now, head to our website. Hopefully we will have updated any visa information as we find out about it. We're going to do our best.
And if you are listening in 2025, also visit our website. Hopefully we'll have updated it.
Definitely visit our website now in 2025 because it's going to be looking so cute. We're re-updating. That was redundant. We're updating.
No, we're updating again. So it is re-updating,
okay.
I think.
We're making all the links go to faster, quicker things, making it clear, making sure all of our colors go together. Yeah, it's going to be really cute.
The artist has joined the conversation. So with that being said, thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you listen to the next episode.
Absolutely. See you next Wednesday. Tanti abbracci.
Tanti abbracci.